Hello, we are at the start time of our session. Um, I'm Lou Berger. With me is my co-chair, Pavan Abiram. We also have Luis Contreras in the room, our secretary. And I think we have enough people here so that we can manage the session. But if you experience any problems, please just feel free to put it in the chat. It's probably the best way to get attention. I don't know if I said this, but welcome to TEAS at IETF 113. We are obviously hybrid. We're the middle of the week, so everyone is really used to that. Being the middle of the week, we're also familiar with our note well. If you are not familiar with it, basically we have rules governing our participation. The ones here are mainly related to intellectual property. And basically anything you say here, it becomes part of our permanent record. This session is being recorded. Everything you contribute at the IETF, whether by email, comment, even, everything except private conversations come under the rules published here. If you're not familiar with it, please go to that link. Similarly, we have a code of conduct, which basically says, please treat everyone with respect and be professional in your interactions. We're midweek, so I think the folks in the room are probably really familiar with how to handle the in-room participation. There is the Meet Echo tool for the mic queue. It does help us out if you use it, but if you don't, Luis is in the room and he'll help us manage the queue. Remote participants, we're experts at doing remote meetings at this point, given the last couple of years. The blue sheets are fairly automatic, although there is a requirement for everyone in the room to sign the blue sheet through the Meet Echo tool. Please do that. For our note taking, we are continuing to use our collaborative tools, and please join us there. I did drop the link in the chat so that it's easy to just go click on. There's also links in the upper right hand corner of your screen for those on Meet Echo. We have a pretty tight agenda. I'm not sure we need to go through anything. This is published. I don't believe there's been any recent changes on it. So all the material is uploaded. Thanks to Drew for pointing out that I uploaded the wrong slide somehow, but that's all been fixed. So we have no new RFCs since the last meeting, and nothing in the queue. We do have one document with our AD, and we have a recent adoption poll, and there were some comments, and we're going to move towards publishing that once the issues are addressed and either directly addressed or captured in that document. We had one liaison that came in, I think it was just last week. Yep. And it's interesting. It's from the Etsy NFV group. It's interesting there is they think that there's some gaps. There's a document that points to those gaps, gaps in the work that we've done. There's an expectation that as I read it, individuals are planning to come participate here as well as there and contribute here. That's great. One question or comment to our AD is this came in via email versus the formal liaison process. And I don't know if that makes this a communication or a liaison or how to handle that. But just wanted to give you a heads up that this seemed to come outside the process. I did check, and we do have a liaison relationship with Etsy. Not sure why. John?
Yeah, do you know offhand who our liaison manager is? Anyway, we should find out who it is and check in with them, I think.
I believe I looked that up, but I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's yeah, we'll check in with them once we figure out who it is.
Yeah, it didn't
Thanks.
seem all that critical because the information got here. They're not asking for any specific action. It just seemed a little bit out of process. And I'm not sure if I don't really understand the Etsy organization well enough to say that, maybe it had to do with the subgroup, that it was a subgroup and not the main group. All right, well, thank you.
Yep.
Robin?
Yes.
Okay, hello. In fact, IETF has no formal liaison with the ETSI. So I think this how to respond this liaison can communicate with the IB liaison coordinator. Yeah, because according to this rules, if there's no formal liaison, there's no responsibility to respond this liaison. That's my some understanding.
Okay, I thought I checked and I thought there was a liaison relationship. But either way, we're okay because number one, they're not asking for a response. Number two, they're saying they're going to come to say here, which is good. And we've listed this under liaison and communications to cover just the case where people don't have formal relationships. So, but thank you for that,
Okay.
Robin. This is just a reminder that if you would like to schedule a virtual interim, to contact the chairs. I don't think that we are looking for anything right now between now and the next IETF. I don't think we have anything on our planning for a virtual interim. But if participants wish one, please just contact the chairs. Yeah, this new step is pretty old at this point. It's just a reminder about our IPR process. I think everyone is really familiar with it at this point. All right, I'm going to, if there's not any questions, we're going to move to the next one.
Okay, let me start the.
You should have the slides as well as slide control.
Okay. I'm Pawan Biram, your other co-chair. Next on the agenda is the working group document status. There are 22 working group documents that are listed here. 3 of those, the ones in blue, are on the agenda today. We have one document, the signaling extensions draft for SMP, which is with the AD. So that leaves us with 18 documents. The status for each of these 18 documents is covered in this deck. Like in previous meetings, I will not be walking through each and every one of those here. I will, however, double click on a select few that the authors believe are either ready or close to ready for working group last call and dwell on them a little bit more. For the rest of them, you can use your own pace, go through the slides and the reports that were sent out to the list and ask questions if any. So let me jump to slide 7. This is the enhanced VPN framework document. A new revision for this was published early this month, and the authors are saying that the document is almost ready for last call and are requesting further review from the working group. The latest revision has more details on the applicability of service data models to enhanced VPN, and also it has some text clarifying the relationship between VTN and NRP. So please do go through it and discuss on the list if this needs more clarification. I do hear echo. I don't know if it's just me, but can everybody else hear okay? Or do you hear the echo?
Yeah, I'm getting a little echo too. I assume that it's just coming back from the room.
Okay. So any questions on this? Yes. So let me jump to slide 9. This is the PCCC use cases document. The authors have completed the pending items and are looking to the working group to decide its fate. As stated in the previous meetings, the chairs have decided to take this to last call. So the ask for the working group is to review this in anticipation of last call. So let me go to slide 10. This is the 3272 BIS document. We have had a couple of revisions published since the last meeting, and there seems to be one more update covering AQM that's ready to be published. The editor is saying that he has no more changes to make, and we should consider taking this to last call. This is a fairly large document, and it could definitely use some thorough reviews from the working group. So please do review it in anticipation of last call. The other document that's ready is on slide 15. Okay. This is the Young Path Computation Model. Rev 17 was published early in the month. Rev 18 just got published yesterday. The authors believe they are ready for last call. So please do add it to your list of drafts to be reviewed in anticipation of working group last call. So those are the drafts that are close to LC and that we wanted to draw your attention to in this deck. Are there any questions on the status of these or any other working group document? I don't see anybody rushing to the mic. Okay, that's all we have for this slide deck. We can move on to the next presentation. I believe it's Dan.
Yes, hi. I will wake up, which is worrying because it's the middle of the day here. Hi everyone. So this is a relatively quick update on the ACTN applicability to POI. So just a reminder, we had some fairly simple use cases. These are sort of functional components across a specific topology here of sort of packet over optical networks. In the document, or if you've looked at the latest document, the main diffs really are some reordering of the sections and the subsections, aligning some of the content specifically to agreed scope regarding segment routing, T end-to-end. More on that a little bit later. We also added some sort of technical details around interdomain link discovery as part of sort of the POI function. And we are now sort of putting substantive text into sort of our conclusion section, which is really one of the major outcomes from the document is what are the gaps, if any. Certainly, we've had a number of new pieces of work that have been sort of initiated from this process. So that's just making sure we've kind of captured those requirements, spun out new documents where required. What we will see in the conclusion document, in the conclusion section in the document is discussion on the POI capabilities for sort of discovering topology, setting up the links, whether it's single domain or interdomain, providing capability from sort of the underlay to the overlay network. We've also, as mentioned, sort of spun out some new work that included the inventory model, some specific requirements for the path computation across particular technologies, as well as some of the discovery capabilities that required sort of to provide automation when setting up IP over optical services. And the sort of the latest section or subsection in the conclusion / summary of the document is really related to segment routing. Sort of more on that a little bit later. So where are we then with our segment routing discussion? Well, there's been sort of various email discussions, but a lot of this discussions happened on our POI call, and we've had a break on those, but we'll resume those after IETF 113, and the dates and times for those are at the end of the presentation. What we're trying to kind of discuss and establish is how the binding between the L3 VPN and the SRT path can be configured. There's a number of options that are open here. Those are summarized on this slide. What we don't want to do, of course, is come to conclusions offline, document them, and then sort of bring them to the working group. So we're really trying to sort of keep the working group involved with these discussions. We've also brought, as mentioned, we've kind of discussed this with various Spring folks. We were considering sort of presenting these in the Spring working group session later this week, but the agenda was extremely busy already, so that there really wasn't sort of an opportunity to kind of do that in any great detail. So we need to kind of handle that, probably continuing that through email, and then maybe inviting some of those folks to attend our POI call. But as mentioned, these are sort of ongoing discussions. Another area that's really sort of had a significant amount of discussion is regarding sort of our interdomain link setups. So this is not just sort of horizontal, but it's kind of vertical as well. So this slide here really shows you almost a process, although it makes sense to look at the figure when you're reading the document. It's a little bit more difficult if this is the first time you've seen this figure, but essentially the MDSC receives a request to set up either an L2 or L3 VPN service. So the MDSC will look at the requirements and then decide what needs to be done, and specifically the order of that to fulfill the service request that it received. So that may require setting up a new optical tunnel itself. That would then support an IP link or a series of IP links. So then the MDSC will have to send the request to the relevant optical PNCs, going back to that sort of earlier figure that we had of the topology, in order to request that optical tunnel. Once the optical tunnel has been set up, then the MDSC will wait for confirmation before it then sends a request to the PNC for an optical link or multiple optical links. And this is all relatively well described in detail in the document, so you can kind of walk through that process. Where there's kind of a requirement either for sort of static or manually configured information, or an option to have a more dynamic method. So this may be things like, once the optical tunnel's been set up, the PNC, the physical PNC, would then potentially be able to automatically discover that this optical tunnel has been established through an sort of an adjacency mechanism, and that would be discovered potentially through something like LLDP, and therefore the new IP link is configured automatically. So these are kind of the things that we've been documenting in the draft, and that's been the intention. I guess what we wanted to do was show how all of these kind of Yang models for ACTN, the optical PNC, the packet PNC, which optical models would you use for the service, for the optical tunnel, for the IP link, and so on and so forth. How are they combined, and what mechanisms are available for automation? So the big area that kind of needs further documentation at this point is, once the IP link has been set up by the packet PNC, how do we then set up the SRT path? Or if this is already an existing service that needs to be sort of optimized or re-optimized after some kind of failure or protection switching, how do we reroute an existing SRT path through a different IP link? And that's kind of work in progress at the moment. So next steps for the document. Well, those are sort of the two big areas, really, I think, that we need to continue. So the SRT discussion, as well as some of the multi-layer link IP setup. These are documented via various issues in our GitHub. And in fact, we've got several issues. I mean, more than several, probably sort of actively around 20 issues. Most of those are relatively minor, editorial updates, figure adaptions, etc. But the list of issues that you see on the slide here, 83, 81, 80, 78, etc. Those are kind of the main issues. And as mentioned, we will continue to highlight these to the working group and also engage with some of the Spring folks. We will resume our ACTN POI calls from March 29th, I believe. We've had to have 2 calls, as we've kind of mentioned previously, because we've got quite a number of authors and contributors that are spread across the various sort of continents around the world. So there's 2 slots. So hopefully one of those will suit a time zone for you. We would like to finish the document, of course. There's been some feature creep, granted, since we started the work. That was to be expected. We try to limit that. Of course, if we keep the document alive long enough, we've got clever people who are always going to raise additional requirements or use cases. So we've tried to, at this point, just sort of draw a line under the document itself, and I think once we finish these 2 sort of major areas of discussion, we'll be ready to kind of stabilize the document, maybe go through a sort of text reduction exercise, make sure that we try to keep the document as succinct as possible, then look for working group last call, probably certainly sometime before IETF 114. Okay, I think that's the final slide I had. Any questions?
Looks like we might have some people in queue. As was in the chat, John asked that we make sure to say our names before we say anything. Of course, I just violated that. This is Lou Berger. So first in queue, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, this is Dhruv. Dan, one query regarding why did we limit it to SRT only? Are we saying that SRT as an example, or are we saying that the scope of the whole document is only when an IP layer we do SRT? This part is not very clear to me.
No, I think that was just essentially the requirement that we had from some of the authors, and we could look to expand on that. It just hasn't been a specific requirement from other people. We haven't seen it from the working group. So we just wanted to kind of limit the scope of sort of the use case and the scenarios that we were looking at.
My suggestion would be that we can easily do this by saying that we are using SRT as an example in the rest of the document. And since ACTN procedures are anyway agnostic to it, they can be applied in a similar fashion. So I think using that kind of terminology would be much better than rather having a document that only focuses on SRTE and uses the name ACTN.
Yeah, I do take your point. It's just that even by saying that SRTE as an example, there is still a lot of sort of detail minutiae that needs to be described. So we're dealing with a lot of potential options, even by just saying that SRTE is the use case that we're using here. But I'll try to, or the authors will try to just highlight that this isn't the only technology that's supported sort of at the higher layer, but it's the example that we've used.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment. One that matches how the level SRTE played when we adopted the document. SRTE was listed literally once. It wasn't the focus of the document. So that readjustment. It would be really good. So thank you. Moving on in the queue.
Thanks. This is Daniel. A question to Dhruv. Is your concern related to the fact that we are just dealing with the TE technologies and we should cover also non-TE, or the concern is more related to segment routing itself?
No, concern is like even if RSVPT is available, that should be fine, right? We should not limit that ACT and POI is only with SRT.
Okay.
Yep. So understood. On that, Drew, Daniele, and Lou. Yeah.
Yeah, and just adding a little color to that comment, when the document was adopted, I believe SRTE was mentioned once, as was RSVP mentioned once. Now, I think SRTE, I just did a quick search, shows up 94 times, and RSVP is still one. So, you know, a detailed example is great, but it's I think the comment is spot on. Group's comment. Moving on in the queue.
Yeah, the problem we face with this document is that there are many options. When you start looking at multi-domain VPN, there are many options to do them, and then you do multi-layer. There are many options to multi-layer, and we were a little bit afraid that we are going to explode on the set of cases that we need to analyze. So we said not all the other cases are not excluded, but we decided we said that it's better to focus only on one case, which is SRT. And if people is interested to have other cases, they can be analyzed either in a new document or otherwise we can expand the scope of this document. But take into account that the more options we put, the bigger the document becomes. And we need to be careful.
The ideal scenario is that you discuss everything in a path control technology agnostic manner, and then expand on examples where they are specific to that particular path control technology. So take that into account and see if you can address Drew's comment.
The generic example and not on the specific. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I think you're done, Dan, right?
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Adrian, you should have the slides. You were here briefly. You seem to have disappeared. All right, you should have slide control and voice. Adrian, we are not hearing you. It says you're muted. Adrian, we can't hear you. Maybe try entering the queue, see if that helps.
You don't by any chance have the lower local mute button pressed, do you? You could just try shouting really, really loud and hope we can all hear you.
I'm going to try taking away your slide privileges, and then maybe we can restart the whole process. And then if we're not, we'll ask you to rejoin, and then move to the next one and ask you to rejoin. So I'm going to revoke slides from you. Let's try it again. Adrian, I think you should re-enter, maybe, hit reload on your browser. We'll give him like half a minute, and if it doesn't work, we will move on to, we'll skip him and come back to him.
We were ahead of the schedule by a couple of minutes. I guess this is helping.
This is just trying to get rid of it. All right, Adrian, we see you back, but we don't see you unmuted.
Yeah, now I'm unmuted. Right.
Yes.
What happened was when you I'd requested share slides and you granted share slides and my mic disappeared.
Interesting. That's really bizarre.
Bugs we have known. I certainly right for asking. I shouldn't ever ask. Right.
Well,
hello.
You should have slide control, and we can hear you, so please proceed. Thank you.
Right. So network slicing framework. The thing to is this note well. There used to be 8 front page authors all the way through this document. And we ran into a bug in the IETF draft submission tool where having precisely 8 authors caused the date field to get scribbled on and the submission failed. So the solution there was to arbitrarily remove Eric from the authors and move him to the contributors. Please note this in no way reflects on Eric's very considerable input and advice that happened as this document was being created. Right, recent revisions since we held an interim in TEAS in October and devoted quite a lot of time to discussion. I will not go through all these bullets, but there have been 3 revisions that were basically picking up and clearing out the points that were raised and discussed at the interim and getting so that 08 completed all of that and included a fairly detailed editorial read through by John Drake and me fixing a lot of nits and duplication that we found. Some of the old text was still kicking around from the very first revision, and that needed tidying up. So there is a 09 in the buffer for submission soon, and I plan that this week. It includes a short section on realization of slices with respect to service function chaining, which is a special case and uses ancillary service demarcation points, service delivery points rather. That text comes from Med and we'll sit down with the other realization examples, and it's brief. Also going is section 5.4. The various prunings and tidyings up made this a really small section, and it only says what is already in other places in the document. So we'll take that out, and I don't think we lose anything. Thanks to John again for finding even more nits. There seems to be no end to the number of nits. It's probably because I can't type. And previously, I'd forgot to acknowledge Christoph, so that goes in 09. If you look in the Hedge doc, I've got some additional material that was not on the slides because it's happened too recently. There's a further change there planned for 09, which was discussed on the mailing list. It's an extra sentence going into 4.1.2 on SLEs to mention the realization or how the operator realizes a slice may itself be an SLE. And this is especially because of the case of multicast, where apparently customers like to tell the operator how to deliver the multicast. Of course, the customer may have no way to know whether this is actually done. There was some text sort of about this in 07, and it got lost in the editorial tidy up. So that's going back in. Okay, that's 09. Then we've had some recent discussions on the list, which I think are resolved. One of them was, how is hub and spoke reflected in the service and the realization? This text was in and then out, so it's now going back in. A provider may use hub and spoke to realize a slice if they like, and a customer that wants to control the hub may build a hub and spoke themselves out of P2P and P2MP connectivity constructs, where the hub is actually a customer's device. Or they could use a real or ancillary service demarcation point as the hub. Okay, there was another discussion. Should this draft be limited to the requirements and applicability arising from 5G? I don't want to be accused of calling consensus, but it seems that the overwhelming view on the list was that the scope must include any use of network slicing, but of course take advice from the 5G use case because it's important. Our related issue was, should this draft be limited to slicing only IP/MPLS networks? Again, I don't want to call consensus, but what I think I heard was that the service should be technology agnostic and totally generic. And we are interested in mapping the service to any IETF network. The realities and discussions of how to slice sub-IP networks then belong in other places, and they're realization questions rather than framework or service questions. So related to those 2 points, there may be some specific questions the CCAMP chairs want to raise, but these, I think, are the questions to tease and not to the editor of the document. And I see Daniele in the queue, so perhaps now's a good time to take it.
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, actually, I mean, 2 of the specific questions.
And funnily, I don't hear Daniele.
Oh, is it only you? Before it worked.
It's only Adrian. It's only Adrian. You sound good.
Okay.
So continue. Maybe
okay.
cut that.
How can we tell Adrian what we're saying?
Adrian, can you hear us?
Well, this really sucks. I see that. Yes, Lou has just typed at me, my audio is broken. And funnily enough, yes, it is, because I can see who's talking, but not hear.
I don't know if it's worth continuing.
I can take the comment and then type it on the chat for Adrian after. So the thing is that we identified some questions from CCAMP to TEAS. Probably the 2 most relevant are the ones that Adrian just described on 5G and limiting slicing to IP/MPLS networks. These are questions that popped up while discussing slicing at OTN layer. Other questions were brought to the mailing list by Igor. So I don't know if you want, we can do a summary of those questions, but I would say that they have already been discussed pretty extensively. So up to you. If you prefer us to send a new email summarizing the questions, we will do that. Otherwise, I think we are satisfied with the answers that we received so far.
Yeah, I'd say if you're satisfied with the answers, there's not much to discuss. So we don't have to discuss it again.
Okay.
In terms of it sounds like there's answers you're not happy with. By the way, I'm getting great echo now. If there's answers you're not, questions you're not happy with the answers with, which ones are those? Are the ones on the slides here or something else?
The most relevant ones are these two, and we are happy with those, with the answer.
You are or are not? I'm sorry.
We are.
Okay, then, and I'll point out, even though he doesn't hear us, so it's good that he doesn't hear that he has this power. It is the job of the editor to capture what they believe is the consensus of the working group in that document. So he's done just fine here from our standpoint, and we appreciate that. I'm going to tell him that he should continue going, and then at the end we'll figure out how to deal with his audio.
Right, that's a most peculiar way of communicating. I hope that was an interesting conversation that you had, and I will listen to the recording afterwards to find out what it was about. All right, there was a question about whether we should include worked examples. This question's been around for a while. But nobody actually coughed up any text, and apart from Med, who pointed me at some text from 8969 that could be useful. Two questions really arise here. One is, does anyone think that the draft will fail without examples? And the other is anyone volunteering to write text for examples?
Luis, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Luis from Telefonica. I would like just to comment that
can you speak up? Can you get a little closer to the mic, please?
Sorry. Yeah, I would like just to comment that there are some other documents starting to describe some potential examples. In my case, I will present later on one on how to map in 3GPP slices to IETF network slices. Sorry. So probably that work could be or either integrated or keep it apart, but there will be some documents describing that, I think.
I have to say that was so low, I couldn't really catch it. I'm hoping, Pavan, did you catch it? Did you repeat it?
Yeah, he said that there are other documents where examples are being specified. One of those documents is being presented later on today. So I guess his preference is not to. I guess he's leaving it to the working group to decide if it needs to be discussed separately or somehow roll it into an appendix into this document. But yeah, the point he's making is it's being discussed in some other documents. The examples are being discussed in some other documents.
Okay, Kieran?
Kiran?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to volunteer to write the example, but if it is covered elsewhere, that's fine. And I also wanted to make a comment that there are too many things in the framework document. So maybe one example won't be sufficient. We may need to have 2 or 3 different instances of how to show this framework in works. Thanks.
Reza?
Hi, this is Reza from Siena.
Can you speak closer?
Yeah,
Can you get?
really have to get super close to the
Can you
mic.
hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Reza from Siena. The first question is whether or not it's helpful to have examples. The answer, in my opinion, is yes. And I can volunteer to write down something about 5G because there are lots of discussion about 5G, and I felt that it is good to have a good example of 5G, at least to have the same context for everyone, because people talking about it, but the context might be different. So I volunteer to do that one, and I talked to Adrian about it.
Thank you, Reza. Appreciate your willingness to help. I think we don't have anyone else in the queue.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so please. Yeah, so please, Reza and Kieran and Lewis, drop me a mail and we can talk about what type of example we're looking at and whether how to map 5G is a good or a bad solution. Right, at this point, I just want to draw your attention to the 5 extra threads that have come up in the last couple of days on the mailing list. I've put those summary of those into HedgeDoc as well. The first of them is just to re-highlight that a service is not a realization of the service. And this is my usual rant about the fact that L3 VPN has confused the service delivered to the customer with the technology used to realize the service. And since this point keeps coming up, we should perhaps include a brief piece of text on the subject in the draft, just to help make it clear. There was a point about SDP and SAP, where SAP is a generic concept in the Ops Area Working Group. And there's also a mention of an SEP in other documents. I don't believe that there's a need for us to make any change in what we've got, but I'd be happy to hear otherwise. There's a really active thread on receiver SLOs, and I don't believe that we've reached a point where we can draw a conclusion from that. So please contribute to that discussion. And that may lead on to the idea of a group SLO, whether it's an SLO that applies to a set of connectivity constructs. And then most recently, there's a start of a thread on multiplexing, and I need to push on that a bit more because I'm not quite sure which bit of multiplexing, what and where in the network that applies. So watch out for emails on all of these. Which takes me then to my last slide, which says I will be posting 09. We're probably not quite done yet because there are those 5 issues to be pushed through. But at that point, I think we might be ready for last call. And I will now stop talking.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Wim, please go ahead.
Yes, Wim Hendricks from Nokia. I raised the point on this multiplexing and mapping. I see we had a bit of a thread. It's related to the realization to a certain extent, but not the real realization. So it's actually in the middle. And so you have, I think the document right now, the framework describes, let's say, the upper level of what the slicing is for IETF. I believe, and I'm not sure whether, probably it's not this document, but there is, in my view, a need to describe the realization aspect in an abstract way without going into the technology as such, because there is a layer in between that is important that does what I call multiplexing and mapping. Maybe there's a better technology, but I believe that's important. Now, the question is, how would that be in a separate document that is detached from it, but associated with it before we go into the specific technology implementations? That's why I raised this point.
Yeah, to just answer your question, Wim, I replied to your email. So I think the idea, in my opinion, is valid, but we can discuss that one. Since you are here, we can discuss that if you want. Okay, so we can go to the next draft. Hello, everyone. My name is Reza Rukui. I'm from Siena. On behalf of my co-authors, Bo, Drew, and Tarek, and Liu Yan, I'm going to present you the Yang model for the IETF network slice services. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, what we try to do here is, if we consider the IETF network slice service controller, there is a northbound, which is a technology agnostic. It receives a request. to create an IETF network slice service with a specific characteristic, as Adrian mentioned in the previous draft. And we have a southbound, which is a technology specific. We want to implement it on an IP or MPLS or optics or other technology. This document is going to talk about the former, the northbound interface that we have. And we had the release one. You will see here that what are the main changes that happen. I assume you already read the first draft or this draft. You already know what the context here is, what is the structure of the draft trying to say. One thing that we did is we aligned the network slice connection with the definition of the connectivity construct that we had. The whole idea of these changes are we want to make sure that we adhere and follow the framework suggestion. What the framework is discussing in terms of the structure, in terms of the terminology, we are going to reflect it here. And these changes that you see here is basically the reflection of that fact. We also introduced the context of the network connection, network slice connection groups, the whole idea of the grouping some connection which have the same characteristic in terms of the SLO and SLE. This is introduced. And as you see here, the network slice type and EP role, these are removed. But the one thing that we didn't do that one in this draft is changing the network slice endpoint to SDP. That right now that term is used. We are going to do that one in the next release. As you see here, all my references, I call it NSE, your network slice endpoint, but just make sure that we understand this is SDP, the framework suggested, and we are going to change it. The next bullet is says network slice tag, NS tag. We introduced that one, and this is, in our opinion, is a good tool to address lots of the discussion that we had in the mailing list. For example, there was some question that how we can introduce some aspect of the, for example, customer name. For some application like 5G, how I can specify the network slice ID which is coming down. If there is a big if here, that if we want to somehow the higher layer knows about some type of the realization that we want to do in the network. It knows that we want to use layer 2 or layer 3. We can use this tag to just reflect that fact. This tag is optional. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. And this is a network slice controller's job to address all those. But this is a very good extensible approach that in the future, if you want to add anything else, we can just do that one. And we design the Yang model, which is extensible, and there is no need for augmentation of any sort. And last but not least, we add some action about the access port, access connection between C and PE, and you can go through the detail of that. Something was added here, and these are basically the reflection, the overall reflection of the changes that has been done in release 1. Next, please. As the seen here, the idea of the network construct modeling, there are three type of the connection is described in the framework: point to point, point to multi-point, and any to any. So, and this is basically the reflection of those things. As you see here, the network connection that we are referring here is depicted here. As mentioned before, NSE is basically the SDP, the access port, the connectivity between any two NSEs, and they are one directional, as you see. Some of them went, for example, point to point. If I want to have that bidirectional connectivity, I have to define both. And why we did it this way? Because in some example, for example, the downstream and upstream traffic, they have the different SLA and SLO. From that aspect, it's a very right approach to make that one. And if you want to have both of them, same SLO and SLA, it should be also possible to do. Next, please. This is another example of whatever Adrian mentioned before, that if we want to have some example, to a concrete example to show what we want to do. The overall picture shows that I have a network slice 1 and S1, which contains 3 group of connections. Connection blue, red, green, and think of color as the SLO and SLE that connection wants, whatever it is. So the whole idea here is each connection that we have here, it has a type and it has an SLO that basically carries. And from that aspect, you can extend this one to any number of the connection that you want to do, whether or not it is applicable to any specific use case. It depends on the use case. For some of the use case, it doesn't make sense. We have to have only one of them. But from the modeling perspective, we should allow that. And this is exactly what has been done. Next, please. There are few issues that still is in progress. I will go through that one slide per issue that we have. One was the network slice group. As I mentioned, the whole idea of the grouping the network slices. We want to see some other the type of hub and spoke. Adrian talked about that as well. We want to see if it should be added there, and also adding connectivity type at the network layer as a connection layer. For example, in the previous example, if the green is point-to-point, there is no need to specify the type for each connection. You can specify green is point-to-point and everybody will inherit that. Those type of things we want to add it, and this was some suggestion from the mailing list that we thought it is valid and it's going to be added to the next release. Next, please. The second one is formal import of RFC 9181, which is the discussion about the common Yang model. We want to use that one, and the proposal here is that if we want to regroup that and having basically the same structure of that Yang in our model. Right now, our model is the one layer, and whether or not it is good to separate it and have same consistency that RFC 9181 has. So we are still doing the discussion, and this is another topic that I think is important to be addressed. Going to the next issue, adding a statistical parameter. For example, for the SLO, as you see here, the current SLO that we have is clearly you see here, and the whole idea here is as the framework goes to the next version, and if there is anything will be added, the proposal is that we are going to add it into the framework. And in most cases, the Yang model is defined in such a way that it's extensible. There is no need really to do the augmentation. We have it there, and there are a very nice way to extend the model. But this is a valid point, and as the framework goes and add more, and we are going to add that one to the next release of the Yang model. And I think that one, if you go to the next one, concludes the discussion that we have here. If I summarize, for us, the next step is at least address these 3 issues that I mentioned to you, and including I didn't mention that SDP2 and SE in one of those, but that one should be also part of that. And there are 2, the last 2, it was mentioned by Tarek a few days ago, that we want to align the terminology for the access port with the document that we already have, and clarify the concept of the access port node ID, because there was something that we use it twice, and for the multi-homing, how it's going to be addressed. So longer story short, 3 issues plus a couple of them that I mentioned here, at most 4 or 5 issues will be addressed. And we feel that at that point, we reach to a level that we address all the question on the mailing list. So I think we are doing well for the timing. If there's any question, I take the critique. Please. Hi.
Okay. Hello. Hi, this is Kiriti. So there are several points you made. One is you call it the VPN type for the access. And I like that it's there, but I would prefer that you said something like the layer of the access, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, as opposed to VPN type. Because if there's a layer 2, for example, you might just say it's a VLAN, or it might be VPLS, or it might be EVPN. So I don't want to get to the specifics of the, especially in the northbound model. Just say I'm connecting at layer 2, I'm connecting at layer 3, or maybe I'm connecting at layer 1. That's just a suggestion. In the southbound, you might say, oh, I would like to make this VPLS. But in the northbound, from a higher level point of view, just say I want a layer 2 connection.
Yeah, that one makes sense. It's exactly the, I guess Adrian also mentioned previously that it's better to make it technology agnostic as much as we can, and this is a good suggestion.
Okay, thank you. And then for your issue number 2, can you go back to using that common Yang model? I like the idea, but I think it was written so that it's common between the two VPN, L2 VPN and L3 VPN. You may, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, you might want to extend it and say this is a common model to, to be across different types of things. But from what I remember, this is primarily to make sure that the L2 and L3 VPN, the network models, have this in common. So if you can reuse it, great, but you might have to extend it.
Sure, that is a valid point. And there was another along the same discussion. Drew also mentioned that if we can, for example, not able to use that, we can in our model separate. We have the same concept of putting two Yang models, maybe in one file, but the two, one is common, one is a specific, and in the future, people can use that common model that we have. That is also another way that we want to see if it is possible, but your point is valid, is taken, and we consider that.
Great. And then you had that diagram with 3 types of connections all in the same slice,
Maybe
red, green, and blue, or red, this one. So I was wondering when I saw this, if there are common things, can you sort of abstract the common things? For example, they all have the same bandwidth, not bandwidth. They have the same latency requirements, but they have different bandwidth requirements, or things like that. And then I saw your connection group. And so maybe, can those two work together? It's
Basically, in this example, we have 3 connection groups:
Okay.
blue, red, green. So this is connection group. I think if we want to go that, in my opinion, it might be possible, but we make the model very complex. We want to make sure that when we say blue, blue is blue, whether or not, if they are the same, why you have 3 of them? Just put everything into one. So the whole idea is, from implementation perspective, we don't want to be to try to go through all detail of a specific SLO one by one and so these are the same, let's put it somewhere. If as an operator you decide to make connection 3 of them, you do it, and they are sort of independent from the modeling perspective. And I think it's very simple and at the same time very clean design, instead of rather to put very complex logic to put some specific together. So from that aspect, I think it's better to keep it this way.
Okay. It was just a question. The last point is, in all of the SLOs I've seen, it's been, latency, delay variation, and so on. Is it not interesting to say my connection is protected? Because if a customer comes, forget slicing, they come to you and say, I want a VPN from you, and I want you to resolve the VPN over LSPs that have protection. So then you don't put it over a regular LSP, make sure it's RSVP with protection. Is that not an interesting SLO requirement from a network slicing point of view?
It might be, but this is mainly the question for Adrian for framework, not this one. We are just importing whatever is defined there. Whether or not this is the case might be not SLO, but SLA. Service level expectation is exactly those things that you cannot necessarily measure them. It's like security, isolation, those type of things. This might be another one that says, I need some sort of protection. And again, depends on the what we want to put the framework. It's a valid point. Yes, it is valid, but it's not relevant to this document. If they are defining something, we will import it and we add it to the model.
Okay, all right. Yeah, sure. Like 50 milliseconds, yeah. Okay, yeah.
So we have one more question in the queue. We're over time. We should take that question and then stop and take our break because we're going to get cut off at some point. Greg, go ahead.
Much appreciate the Kiridi pointing to their protection. I have somewhat different view. I think this is how something can be realized. And let's discuss it on a mailing list in a separate thread, details, but I think that their protection is something that operator can use, whether redundancy or control plane service restoration, and not necessarily needs to be exposed to the client. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, we can discuss it on the mail list. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you all. We will see you in less than half an hour. Looking forward to continuing the good discussion.